going to start this on time. John? We're on. Thank you. We're being recorded tonight just for future broadcast on Stow TV. My name's Don Hawks. I'm chairman of the Lake Boon Commission, for those of you who don't know me or may be watching on delayed TV. To my right is Commissioner Kris Krablin and Conray Wharff, long-term member of the commission. I'm going to read the legal notice which was advertised in Hudson and Stow newspapers. The Lake Boon Commission of Hudson and Stow, Mass. will hold a public hearing on November 14, 2018 at 7:30 p.m. at the Stow Community Center, 509 Great Road, Stow, Mass. to consider proposed changes to the adopted Lake Boon bylaws and rules pursuant to Chapter 712 of the Acts of 1941. Copies of the proposed changes are available at the offices of Town Clerks of Hudson and Stow and online, lakeboon.org, and at least I think they were on the LBC website as well. I'm just going to do a very brief overview of why we're here tonight, when it started, and where we go from here. And then I'm going to ask Kris Krablin to highlight some of the changes from the existing rules. We have a limited number of copies in the back because we were hoping that people did have a chance to read them at home and come with any questions. Our purpose tonight is not to debate anything, but to gather comments, questions, or to the extent we can to explain the differences that are here. The process from here, because it's, we are chartered by a state law, it's spelled out that we must, to amend the existing rules, which were last reprinted in 1997, but I'm not sure if there were any particular changes then. But any changes have to be recommended by this body, the Lake Boon Commission. If you're going to move chairs, you have to pick them up and carry them. Don't drag them, please. We make recommendations which are in their present form where we stand today after having met and talked about these changes for at least half a dozen times, probably 7 or 8 times over the past year. In some minute detail, many of you attended many of those hearings. The resulting document that we change, if there are any changes to be made, will be proposed to both Stow and Hudson town meetings in May. Hudson's has to be prepared and handed in by the end of January, so we have a tight deadline. From there, if both towns approve them, they're submitted to the Attorney General and the Department of Environmental Police for review to make sure there is no conflict with state law. And why we're doing this now is, as some of you remember, it's been almost 2 years now, I guess, since the state advised us that our hometown way of enforcing things was not good enough anymore. The original act empowered the commissioners to promulgate rules and to enforce them after their publication, which we had done kind of quietly as much as we could for since 1941. That's about a little over 77 years. But the state, once it codified Chapter 90B and set forth the rules in that document, we had to recognize that any enforcement can only be accomplished by uniformed sworn police officers, which is why we have the town of Stow has appointed its officer to perform those functions. And the stimulus for this was the realization, which we were advised of well after the fact, that the state had changed certain distance rules that quite some time before we knew it, and the state never told us about it. What you're going to see before you tonight does not specify in any great detail many of those laws, but Kris will explain why we're going at it that way And we will, once we get through, she gets through, we'd like to let her go through her presentation first, and then we will recognize speakers to come to, we have to come to the microphone one at a time because of the TV, and also we have some hearing impaired devices that are, you have to speak just about this close to the mic to be heard. So please do so. I suggest that rather than being called on to be recognized, if you want to, if you have a question you'd like to come up, just come up and just wait over here in line. When one speaker is through, you can be the next. But please identify yourself by name and street address, and whether it's Stow or Hudson, for our records. We had a sign-up sheet. We have another one here. We don't need two. But I will, when I get through here, I'll pass it along. If you haven't signed it, please sign in as attending tonight. So without further ado, and so we can all get home and wax our snow shovels before tomorrow, ungodly thought. Kris, please step up.
Okay, I'm going to be very brief. So hopefully folks have taken a look at what we have put together, what's been posted. You've, as mentioned, a number of you have been at meetings, so that's great. As Don mentioned, the rationale for this is we need to make sure we're in compliance with state law, right? We cannot get out of compliance with that. We can be more restrictive, but we cannot, be more lenient than that. So the way that we've addressed this is we've made relatively few changes. I'm going to walk through very quickly the key ones, not every single thing and not all the wording or anything like that. But basically what we've done is try to ensure that we no longer try to identify a unique rule where there's already a state rule. Okay, so unless we specifically want to make ours more restrictive, we're letting the state regs, people be accountable for adhering to the state regulations, and we're not listing them in here. So a number of rules are actually gone. So real quickly, I'm just going to highlight a few of the major ones, and then we're going to open it up for questions and discussion around that. We've made a few changes that literally removed rules because of the state regs. So that includes things like the distance. So that's probably one of the biggest things we did. We have identified that for the ice heaters where we have big holes, we found, is it, no. People can, you can't hear me either?
Don't get closer to the
Okay, I thought so. Everybody can hear me, right? Okay. I was going to say. All right, so so there's ice, as folks may know, there's ice heaters, and these create holes in the ice, keep things from freezing. So we've just introduced the fact that if you're going to do that and it's larger than a certain size, we've expanded that it needs to come to the Lake Boon Commission for approval on that. We've identified, we've already had that intoxicating liquors has been prohibited on the lake, and we've added marijuana to that so that recognizing that that could be another substance that would impair folks on the lake. Last year, no, 2 years ago, we put out a public safety notice to advise people who are on the water to have their properties marked in a way that shows the address that's visible from the lake year-round. We had a slightly different rule that had more to do with identifying a dock previously, so this one we have updated to just reflect that we do need to know that the property is identified with an address. So that was just a change. We can have our own fines for certain rules that are unique to Lake Boon, and previously that was $50. We had thought to up that to $100, but we may not be able to do that. We may have just gotten feedback that says that sort of under our charter, the max that could be would be 50, so it may remain at 50. Other things include around boat operation, not much change except for we've just introduced that as a boat operator, you're also responsible not only for, the safety of people, but also if you cause property damage. So just a reminder to folks that it's not just people, but it's also property in that space. Quiet hours. So we've not changed the quiet hours. So that's the Sunday period. And we have clarified in the wording that it is also inclusive of state holidays. So we're not listing them because those are determined by the state and they're published by the state. So those quiet hours also apply on state holidays, which of course there's probably only 4 that fall inside the window of boating time. So let's see. As we mentioned, the distances has been removed. We are clarifying that for purposes of water skiing or other towing activities, that only one line is permitted, and also I think clarifying that no more than 2 persons on that line. So if you have a tube or something, you can't pile 4 people on it. Maximum of 2 in that space. And then I think the only kind of other thing I'd note is we did have a rule as it relates to airboats, ones that are propelled by air, and it included a reference to horsepower of that boat. We've just taken that out because we don't know that it's relevant. So this is not like 100% of every little tweak, but many, as we mentioned, many rules just were removed, minor wording changes, and then the content here. So, Don or Conray, anything
yes,
you want to add?
I would just add the one thing that we did change or suggest is adding the 3rd and 4th basins to the no ski area along with the narrows. As a practical matter, it's never been a practice, but they are clearly too small, too narrow to safely navigate under state law or common sense boating Okay, I'm not going to be doing most of the talking because our purpose here, as I said tonight, was for you folks to come. You do need to speak into the mic for the TV, but don't get too close for it or it messes up these devices for some of the audience. Okay, anyone want to start? Come up, make a comment, ask a question. That's what we're here for. This could be a very quick hearing.
Someone break the ice, that's it.
I'll break the ice and be first. I'm Alex Andrews. I live at 97 Hunter on the Hudson side. I am curious if council has looked over the changes.
Not at this point.
Okay. I understand the wisdom of deferring to state law, where the things are outlined as to speed and distances and so on. And I am assuming that state law requires that anybody operating any kind of boat should be competent. Is that in the state laws? I didn't get the chance to read the whole state law. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Since when has law made sense?
Okay, well, that may be true.
State law dictates who can operate a vehicle, a motorboat. And they don't really talk about, there's no licensing or competence requirements that I'm aware of, only age.
Oh, that's interesting. Because in rule number 7, the Lake Boon Commission states clearly that operators of boats and canoes need to be competent. Oughtn't we include drivers of motorboats to be competent too? It makes sense to me.
I think that it would be duplicative of state law regarding motorboats. They list ages for people. We're one of the few states that does not require licensing for boats. unfortunately, in my opinion, that anyone buys a boat and is handed the set of keys and said, congratulations, you're a boater. And that does not bode well for some folks.
Well, then I'm wondering why you're adding an additional requirement that,
This is not additional, this was language from the previous law.
I understand that, but maybe, perhaps, in all of our interests, we would like the operators of the motorboats to be as competent as require the paddleboarders and the canoe operators. It seems like reasonable to me to require competence of anybody operating any kind of boat, whether it's motorized or not. And so I'm asking that be modified, that language be modified. It just makes sense. Otherwise, it looks like you're discriminating about, against a certain kind of vessel. That's all.
Thank you.
Everybody knows all about it? No.
I have a question about rule number 5 and making an opening in the ice 12 inches in diameter. So are you thinking that that's like an ice fishing hole? Or is that like some people put something in the ice that melts the ice quite more than 12 inches and may even like pass over in front of our dock, which we like to ice skate from. So I'm wondering if there needs to be something added here to include that device that that opens the ice.
Conray, why don't you answer from the mic, because we have one of these assistive hearing devices attached to.
And I forgot, Susan Fields, North Shore Drive. Tamper.
Thank you, Susan. Your concern is actually addressed when we talked about ice eaters. So the device you're talking about is called an ice eater. We've had trouble with those, especially over in your part of the lake, where I won't mention names, but they started up an ice eater, left for the winter, and it opened up half the lake. And we spent quite a bit of time dealing with that. No, I'm not going to talk about names. So we did do that. We did pursue that, and that's why we actually require a permit for an ice eater now. And so in order to do that, you're supposed to have a permit. If you don't have a permit, we actually went and disabled that ice eater to solve that problem last time. And the fire chief helped us in Stow, and yeah, it was a big issue. So, but we require permits for ice eaters, and the 12-inch opening, you're right, is pretty much what the ice fishermen do. But occasionally, I don't know where you live, but I have some polar bears in my part of the lake, and they open up the ice so they can go swimming on New Year's Eve. So that would apply to anybody that makes a big opening in the ice.
Excuse me. Any comments have to be addressed through the mic, both for TV and for clarity for anyone who is here.
Yes, so to answer your question, the Rule 5, Rule 5 does specify that if it's any larger than the 12 inches, then it requires the permitting. The 12-inch size is okay, right? If somebody out doing ice fishing is okay, but as soon as it gets larger than 12 inches is when it then requires the approval.
Oh,
okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Alana Cockman. I'm 191 Barton Road. The only concern that I have, and this is a lot of work, so I appreciate everything you've done, is the speed, section B, number 2, where it says the speed in the narrows should be not, you can't speed in the narrows. So, but are we clarifying where the narrows is? I think you mentioned like basin 2 to 3, and then basin 3 to 4, like going down towards the boonies. Are we going to put in here exactly where the narrows are? Because people sometimes don't realize where the narrows are. And this probably isn't the place to bring it up, but some people that are driving boats don't know what no wake means. We're in the narrows and people are coming out and yelling, slow down, no wake. They have no idea that they're doing anything wrong. So I'm just wondering, and this may not be the place to do it, but that sign, boaters really know that sign, but a lot of people aren't regular boaters. They are out there maybe even using somebody else's boat, and they don't know what no wake means. Is there any way that we could put no waves in the narrows so that they can see that? Just an idea. It just may solve a problem. So that's my only thought and concern. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
thank you.
Steve O'Riordan, 12 Davis Road. Actually, to address one of your questions about the narrows, I did actually work with the commission on a map that's posted at the boat ramp that lists the basins and the narrows, and not that everybody is going to remember exactly where it is, but at least it's something that kind of defines, you know, the idea was before they put their boat in, they see where the narrows are. And the other thing is, I mean, the buoys that we have at the Narrows, I think they say, what do they say? No wake on them, right? No wake, which is pretty much
Headway speed only, no wake.
I mean, you know, from my boating experience, it's either going to say no wake or have like a speed limit requirement. And I think that we've gone back and forth about this a few times too, because like my boat is a ski boat that has a rudder in the back, so my headway speed is like 5.5 miles an hour, which is faster than a pontoon boat, which goes through at like 2 miles an hour. But, you know, I make ripples behind me, but that's as slow as the boat can go, just in gear. So that was my comment on that. And the other thing I was wondering about was the ice eaters. I mean, has the commission thought about the process, and maybe I missed this in one of the previous meetings, about granting these permits? Is it just applying to get a permit? I mean, you know, because in theory you could have like 5 people have ice eaters, and then somebody in the middle doesn't want their ice eaten, and then we run into that issue. And I'm just wondering if there's, you know, thought to that.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. Just Alana Cockman again. Just a thought on speeding in the Narrows, and I'm sure your boat isn't speeding, but we have people that are just coming full throttle through. I mean, it's not wondering if they make a wake, they're making waves. So I am taking issue with that. And the other thing is, if we're going to, like, the map is a wonderful idea, but if people are going to take this paperwork, they're not going to see a map. If they're going to know between this basin and that basin and this basin, it's really specific, so that it's their responsibility to know where is where. But if it's not specific in here, they're not going to know. My thoughts. Thank you.
Just a quick comment on that. Obviously, there are a lot of people who come in from, use the main term, from away. We've tried to address that by posting the regulations at the boat launch, but not everyone reads those either. But what we do, obviously, and define it for the areas in which that headway speed, although it might vary, is the placement of buoys. Conray has been good enough to do that for a good number of years. And technically, if again, the police are the ones that would have to observe this or hear complaints of it, but they would say, if you speed up significantly before you get to the no-wake buoy, that's a violation. So perhaps we could clarify, because most of this applies to boating season, that there's no wake in those areas between those buoys. That gets us into a different problem down the third and fourth basins. But well, that's a good point to bring up. And we can make the map Steve worked on. I think it was a nice color presentation. It pretty well delineated where that is. I think we can make those available also. That's just kind of a procedure, administrative procedure, as opposed to something that needs to be in the rules. It's a good point.
We could use your help on this one. We only have limited funds for patrol, so we cannot have a patrol boat there all the time. But if there are boats that are offending, get the numbers off it and call Stow Police, and they will take care of it. But if they don't know about it, and we don't know about it, we can't take care of it. So get the numbers, take pictures, take a video of the boat. You're hitting one of my huge frustrations, and you know, my friends, I spend time at Dick and Cindy's, and we'll see people, and some of them go flying through. The only way we can stop them is if we can catch them, and you're right, for the most part, it's off-lake people. So just help us, take pictures, call Stow Police.
Carolyn McDonald, 76 North Shore Drive. In the memo, you referenced Rule 1A, added a reference to boater operators having responsibility for property damage caused by their operations. I'm not sure it's that clear. I have a big question mark next to that one. I mean, you outline that they shall operate motorboats at a speed that's reasonable, but I don't see where we're holding them responsible for any damage. Just mentions damage.
It's actually in state law, Chapter 90B. So we're not trying to replicate 90B.
When we started this process, or before, slightly before that, some of you might have attended a meeting at the Hale School. Any of you here went to that meeting? A few folks. At that point, we convened the meeting, but it was run by Stow Police and the Environmental Police. One of the things that was repeatedly pointed out by Captain Walker from the Environmental Police is that boat owners are responsible not only for the operation of their boats, but for the wakes that they create. And I think that we are, by referencing it here, the implication is, and I have heard a lot of individual property owners say there has been property damage that they allege, we aren't lawyers, we're not enforcers, but they allege is being caused or exacerbated by large wake boats, or boats which create large wakes. It's more correct. The Conservation Commission in Stow is presently dealing with several of those issues, and people that have taken remediation steps without going through the Concom. You can't do anything to your waterfront, by the way. This isn't our bailiwick, it's Concom, without going through your Conservation Commission to get authorization, because it's in the delineated wetland over which they have jurisdiction along the shoreline. We don't. But someone suggested to me in this vein that, as Conray suggested, you might want to, if there is a pattern established, document it the best you can. Video it. Video the waves and the action, and over time, if the shoreline is changed, you have some way to prove what has happened. But again, if there are people that are creating gigantic wakes and are creating unsafe conditions or damaging conditions, those must be reported to the Stow Police. 978-897-4545 is the non-emergency. I mean, so it doesn't get you into the car crash ambulance line. But they will log those calls. And believe me, they want to keep the place quiet and help us to help you and help ourselves. But they come back to us frequently and say, we didn't know there was an issue with this. Nobody called us until you tell us at a meeting. So this is why we harp on, it's your responsibility to know the rules, but also how they should be enforced, and that's by the Stow Police.
I'm Lou Thomas, Lakeside Ave, on the Hudson side. I just have a question about the quiet hours on Sundays and holidays. A long time ago, it used to be just between Memorial Day and Labor Day, and now is it all the time, or is it just, what is the clarification on that, and why was it changed and stuff? That's something I was just always been curious about.
The ambiguous language referencing a couple of holidays was brought to the Commission's attention before I became a member, this time. I was on the Commission for 12 years until 22 years ago, I remember, because that's when my daughter was born. And now I've been back on, this is my second year. But sometime during that period, there were issues brought to the attention, correct me, Conray, if I'm not speaking correctly, about the interpretation of that. And my understanding is that from that point, a few years back, it was interpreted by the then commission and continues to be holiday is a holiday is a holiday. So that's why in our deliberations leading up to this, there was some discussion as, well, what is a holiday? That's why Kris pointed out there is an official list put out by the Secretary of State that delineates state holidays. And of course, one of the other issues is if 4th of July is on a Sunday, celebrated on a Monday, it creates a situation which some people are unhappy with. Others love it because they have a couple of extra days to be able to swim without fear of getting run over. But is that, as it stands, proposed tonight, it would leave it for whatever number of holidays, I think there's 10 or 11 specified by the state. All of those holidays would be quiet hours, 2 to 6.
Thank you. Thank you, Lou. Historically, the rules were last changed, I believe, in 1968. And before 68, I think it was summer only. I'd have to go back and read them again to be sure. But I have the documentation, as does the town, Linda has them at Town Hall. So the last legal change to these rules, I believe, was 1968, and I believe before 68 it was summer only. After 68, I think that and holidays got inserted, creating the ambiguity, I can't say it, ambiguity of what a holiday is. And of course, there's only really 2 of them that affect us, one in the spring and one in the fall, Columbus Day and Patriots Day. Because the rest of the time, it's kind of too cold to do much anyway. But anyways, so I think that's what happened. And we can research that if you'd like.
Hi, Richard Cummings, 22 Davis Road in Stow. Regarding the boating regulations, the speed rules, so I also had some notes on the narrows, and I'm going to say more than I will ask that maybe we change some of the wording to include. So the narrows are actually defined by the geography, because since it's so narrow there, it's impossible to go far enough away from either of the shores, from both of the shores at the same time to do more than headway speed. So the narrows are defined by the geography. We put markers there to help people. So what I'd sort of like to have you consider including in wording is that the narrows, that the headway speed in the narrows applies at all times of the year, not just when the marker buoys are out there. Because I've noticed that the incidences of people speeding up through there seems to be increased when the buoys are not there. Not that that stops some people anyways, but so if we had some wording that said whether the buoys are there or not, it's still the narrows. In terms of the quiet hours, I don't, for a couple of reasons, I don't really think that saying Massachusetts state holidays is a very clear way to do it, or has other issues. It seems to me that if we just spell out the ones that we want to have, if you want to include Columbus Day, Patriots Day, whatever, just spell those out. Part of my reason for this is that when we say Massachusetts state holidays, I mean, as Conray mentioned, these were last, our rules were last amended like 50 years ago. In the next 50 years, if somebody at the State House wants to have as a state holiday just whatever, there was some question as to whether Bunker Hill Day, for example, was a state holiday declared. Maybe it's not now, but something like that could be declared for whatever reason. And it just doesn't seem like it's appropriate for our lake rules to be tied for 50 years or so to the state people's determination of what a holiday is somewhere, because it may have nothing to do with our lake and our town. So I'd rather have us just pick which the holidays are. If it's 3, 4, 5 holidays, then just pick those and just delineate what they are specifically. If they'd left out of the wording in the current bylaws that said including these holidays, it would have been pretty clear. And then I'd also just like to, on hang on a sec, Rule 2B, which the first half I'm fine with, 1 tow line for a boat, but the second one, towing more than 2 persons, you know, all boating has to be done safely at the responsibility of the operator, and I've seen situations where on a big tube, an adult goes out with 2 very small children, 1 under each wing on the tube, and they do it, and there's no other boats out. It's plenty safe to be doing it under certain circumstances, and it seems like we shouldn't have a rule that just that restricts that, when in many cases it's perfectly safe and a viable option. I'd rather see us say no more than 3. Probably pushing past 3 is getting ridiculous, but I've seen 3 and I've seen it done very safely, and I don't think we should restrict it to just 2 for all circumstances.
Alex Andrews, 97 Hunter Avenue, Hudson. Actually, I have another question regarding quiet hours. Does the Lake Boon Commission and these rules have any jurisdiction or purvey over snowmobiles screaming around in the middle of the night?
Yes.
Because that really is really kind of annoying. I don't know what to do about that. I'd love your counsel on
That's
that.
environmental police. I would start with the Stow police, let them know. But clearly, we have no jurisdiction over them.
So, once the lake is frozen, the Lake Boon Commission doesn't have jurisdiction? I just kind of wonder, where's that line?
Clearly, the only reference we have to anything in the winter is ice, as we've
Right,
discussed before.
okay.
But this was, keep in mind, the basic outline of these rules, which is pretty much unchanged since 1941, including some of the quaint language
Right.
on the general rules, was put into place when Lake Boon was a very different place.
Absolutely, and then it didn't
I
exist.
first came to Lake Boon in 1949, and everything closed up Labor Day. There might have been half a dozen houses or a dozen houses around the lake where people stayed during the winter. And it certainly was never contemplated that these problems would arise. But even if they had, at this point, that would still be, any enforcement of that problem has to be with the police. And if you call the Stow police, the best they can do really is to alert the environmental police, because they don't have snowmobiles either. The
Yeah,
environmental
I've
police
been down
don't.
that road, and I'm like, can't sleep, and the police people say, call the environmental police, but they enter their phones Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, so that's a dead end. I'm just wondering if we
The
could...
police answer 24 hours a day, ma'am.
No, they have told me to call the environmental police. Well, how do I do
see.
that? So I'm just wondering if it's a problem that as gas doesn't get more expensive, it's a problem. Is it absolutely outside the jurisdiction grant, or the powers granted by whatever statute for us to make a rule about that? Really? Really? I'm so sorry to hear that. I will write to our Congress people. Ask for you to do it too.
So I think it's a very, very good question, but as we, as a commission, are chartered through legislation, we're bound by that legislation unless we get it changed, right? So right now, that really establishes us rules and regulations for the protection and policing of the waters of Lake Boon with the towns for permitting and regulating the use of motorboats, other boats, canoes therein, regulating conduct of persons, bathing in. It's really all focused, at the time, thinking in terms of water. So we, at this point, don't interpret that to mean we can establish rules for things like snowmobiling. So I think we can ask about that as going forward, but.
In reference to your comment about the environmental police, they do answer 24 hours a day. You just got to know the right number. So it's online. You got to go to MassGov, find the environmental police, and you'll find their 24-hour number.
Carolyn McDonald, 76 North Shore Drive. I have a follow-up question. So the rule about the ice eaters, does it have to be removed because you don't have control over it?
That was in the original legislation, in the original rules, which has been approved, because it's not regulating motorboats. It's not any mechanized equipment.
I understand that, but under the law here, it says that water, not ice.
Well, if you make a hole 12 inches wide, you've got water. And that's been there and approved. We just want to improve it so that the ice eaters do not cause unsafe conditions. The last time, which Conray alluded to, before the police could cordon off the area out in that area in the first basin, there were at least 2 people that went through the thin ice as it was skimming over again.
I understand all that, but based on the charter, we're talking about ice, so someone who has an ice eater could challenge that rule because you don't have control of it.
Hi, Red Aylward, Hale Road. I had a question about the 90B reference. I think I may have missed it, but the only place I see it is in the document references. Is that the only place we say it? And almost the way it's worded, not part of the actual bylaws, would almost make me think it doesn't apply. And I think this is a different direction than you're heading, but I wonder whether some of the 90B laws ought to be restated in here for those out-of-towners that come to the ramp. And now they aren't going to necessarily read the poster anyways, but you may as well put it in front of them, things like distance from the shore, and I have to believe there's a few that ought to be restated. But I know you guys have talked about this issue for a long time.
Yeah, that's a long discussion. So Red, you have a driver's license?
Yeah.
Is it stated, all the mass laws stated on your driver's license? No. Yeah, well, that's the problem. You're responsible to know the law, whether it's boating or on the road. And yeah, we've discussed that ad nauseum. We're trying to keep this simple and not make it complicated. And we on purpose did not restate a state law for a lot of reasons. First of all, state laws change, and we didn't want to be in the business of continually changing stuff every time the state changed. So by referencing 90B, 90B is what the state enforces, and 90B is what our patrol officers enforce, and we're out of that business. So yeah, it's a good point.
Well, I disagree with that, because I use the 2x4 method.
So just to answer your question about the document references, we put those there. They will not be part of the official bylaws but we did kind of want to keep track of what we saw as those, and as Connie said, there may be additional laws that come in place that take precedence. So rather than put those in now and then having to change, we felt it appropriate to just make people accountable for, compliance with laws.
They actually say not part of the bylaw.
Yeah,
Excuse me,
yeah,
you have
yeah.
to speak at the microphone, please.
So the question was, but they're here. So literally, what's under this line will not be part of the bylaws. Sorry for the confusion about that, but it's.
What is part of the bylaw is the paragraph introductory to boating regulations, which is new to this document, which clearly states It's a great pond in the state of Massachusetts. It means that it's governed by the boating regulations established by the state, and it is the boater's responsibility to know and follow those laws. And then we specify some additional ones. We can be more restrictive than the state. We cannot be more lenient. So they will be included when we print and disseminate, assuming that these are finalized. We will still have those document references. So it isn't just, oh, what state laws? These are the laws that we are referencing.
Laura Diamond, 76 North Shore Drive, and I'm glad you brought that up because having attended all of these meetings myself, and it's been a lot of work, thank you guys, I feel really strongly that some of the 90B laws need to be referenced in our bylaws, and specifically the changes that occurred for us after that meeting last time, or in the past 2 years, about the distance. These are the ones I'm most concerned about that I think need to be highlighted in the bylaws. The distance from shore. The thing that also changed for us with the reference to 90B is no skiing after sunset. I think that's, do I have that right? Sunset to sunrise. Right, but our bylaws state that there's no wake. Right, but now you can't water ski after sunset, correct? Okay. So that was brought up in the 90B changes, and I think somehow they need to be highlighted in our new bylaws so they're front and center in front of people's faces. The distance from shore, the skiing at sunset, and the fact that, and I know that's included, the thing about wake causing erosion on the shores, and Carolyn made the point that maybe it's not, it's not highlighted enough, but I think that's a big deal for us, and we've talked about trees falling down and what we're going to do about trees and who's going to be responsible, and that's in fact due to the erosion on the lake. So, and then the other law that I think that isn't paid attention to much, and people are unaware of it, is the use of life jackets, that people have to wear life jackets after Labor Day and up until Memorial Day in a non-motorized boat, correct? And people are unaware of that. Pardon? I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Okay, but anyway, I won't be able to hear you with that. So I think those are the things that I would like to see referenced, and I know we've gone around that, and I know that if you don't end up putting it in the bylaws, then we have to really do a lot of work around education and knowing and educating people who live on the lake and educating people who use the lake who don't necessarily live on our shores. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and that is the question of, and this is not in our bylaws, I don't know how it came to be or if it really came to be, but I know that either there was an agreement or I don't know if it was a handshake or an understanding that people weren't going to water ski before 7 o'clock in the morning during the week. And there was a big discussion from people that were living around the point into the Narrows that there was just so much noise in front of people's houses when people are water skiing early in the morning between 7 o'clock in the morning. And so I don't know how that happened, but it seems to be that water skiers were respecting that for the most part, starting at 7 a.m. I like to swim personally before 7 a.m., 6:15, so I can avoid the water skiers and they can avoid me. But then there was a slippery slope of people skiing earlier in the morning. The boat started moving around 10 to 7 a few times this summer. So, and I bring it up here because it's a public hearing, and I just would like to hear from people about how you feel about that, if you would like to see it in the bylaws. There's obviously not a safety reason to not have people water skiing at 5 or before, after sunrise. But I just wondered, as lake residents, how you feel about it, and if you would like to have a discussion about that. Potentially to put it into these bylaws.
I think this is an issue that was brought up at a recent meeting. It was an issue that was raised at a recent meeting, and we said that we had not contemplated that starting with this deliberation that's gone on for 7 months, and that it was the first, I think, that I had heard that issue raised, and it seemed to be that was perhaps one with merit, but it kind of came late to the party. I'm not saying we won't consider it, but that's why it's not there now.
Susan Tamker, North Shore Drive. I can set my clock to 7 a.m. just by the sound of the ski boats going off the dock nearby. I think it should be later. I mean, 7 o'clock, especially for retired people like myself, 7 o'clock is very early.
Steve O'Riordan, 12 Davis Road. I'm a boater and a water skier, and I'm also not a morning person. So this really doesn't apply to me, but in general, I think we shouldn't have laws. We should have the laws be what they are in the state, and if it's from sunrise to sunset, then that's what they should be. There's a lot of things that go on around my house and on the lake and in the town that I don't like, but if people are allowed to do it, that's just part of living with other people. And in the same respect, I think at one meeting I argued vehemently against somebody who suggested there be regulations against swimmers because there was on some pond in Harvard or something. I thought that was absolutely ridiculous too. So I'm for less is more.
Anybody else? Not going to keep people here against your will. I know we're fun to look at up here, the monkey sitting on the tree, but we all have other parts of our lives. So we've heard some good comments. I think some of the things that haven't been commented on have helped us as well. Things that we might have thought in our own narrow deliberations might be raised flags. And it's helpful for us to go back and see that we can narrow down specifically what those areas are. And it's a appointed commission, 3 members, and it takes majority vote to make a recommendation. Maybe, hopefully, most of them will be unanimous. Maybe they all won't be. And I can't predict what areas that might be. Our schedule now is to meet next on December 5th. We had originally planned to meet earlier than that, but our schedules got crossed. So there will be a posted meeting for December 5th at which we will discuss. That is not the purpose of tonight. We're not going to debate anything here that we've heard. That will take place probably back at the Stow Town Building. At a meeting to start there at 7:30, which are also televised. If you have any thoughts about something that you heard here tonight or you missed it, thanks to Stow TV, Jonathan Daisy is up in the background there taking time out of his life to come down and tape this. I'm sure it will be on Stow TV, and most of their programs end up on YouTube as well. So there'll be ample opportunity to refer back to it. So, any closing comments any of us would like to make?
I just want to say thanks for everybody coming. And, yeah, it's a challenge for us, because it's a community with a bunch of different interests, right? So I like what Steve said about, you know, we all have, I didn't know you weren't a morning person, though, but, but anyway, so everybody, thanks for showing up. I really appreciate you being here.
So with that, I'll close the hearing, and I will ask if you can give us a hand. We set up all the chairs. If you wouldn't mind, those of you who are able, if you at all have any problem, don't worry, but stack them against the chair. We'll take care of those that are left behind. Thank you again.